So you have the historical colonization of the Korean Peninsula by Japan, and then you have the Korean War, and then you have a back and forth between the relationships for a while, but then it starts going nowhere. It's shaken up again through abductions. It's back to a stalemate, and now, even after the passing of regime, nothing changes. How do you describe the situation today?
Well, both Abe, Suga, and now Kishida, they've all said they wanted to have a summit with Kim Jong-un to discuss the future of their relations. But I think both sides realize that unless there's some major concessions given on both sides, it's not going to happen. Because as you might remember, Donald Trump walked away from Kim Jong-un at their summit in 2019 in Hanoi, Vietnam. And since then, the relationship between the U.S. and North Korea has also been stagnated. So from North Korea's perspective, they have to wonder what's the point of coming to the table with Japan if the same thing is going to happen. So Japan has been actually very flexible with North Korea. That was the subject of my master's thesis with Shinzo Abe. He did everything from loosening sanctions to increasing sanctions to trying to have summits with North Korea to trying to put pressure on them. But it seems that nothing has worked. And again, whatever happens going on from now, it has to be a situation where both sides can get something. But also, these are just short-term games we're talking about. If that can actually extend into long-term games, that would be solving a very difficult foreign policy issue. It's a lot like Ukraine and Russia or Israel and Palestine. There's a lot of these situations where both sides probably have to give up something, but both sides aren't willing to give up anything.
Do we know from a Western perspective what is the end game for North Korea? What do they actually want? Or are they also trying to lead other country governments in the dark, kind of without revealing themselves?
I think North Korea's ultimate goal is just survival for the time being. As we opened our conversation with, they're the only country in the world that is still a lot like these communist countries from the 1960s and throughout the Cold War. So what Kim Jong-un wants is for his regime to stay stable and to continue to exist. So there's a lot of questions about who's going to succeed him. He recently unveiled his young daughter out for a lot of these propaganda videos. So some people think that maybe he's kind of grooming his daughter to be a successor. I think we believe that he does have a son, but I think his son is still too young to have actually been brought out yet. So he could also possibly be a successor. There's also the speculation that maybe his sister would also be a successor as well. But this is all, I think, very long-term speculation because he's still very young, and despite his health issues and his obesity, he's still around. So the West is going to have to prepare for North Korea to be around for another few decades. And this previous mentality that North Korea is going to collapse any day, I just don't think it's going to happen. So as I said, we have to probably learn how to live with a nuclear North Korea, maybe some form of arms control, because if we look at it, China is a huge rival to the U.S. and to Japan, to all these other countries. And I think most would agree that China is probably actually a bigger threat than North Korea is just because of how huge of a country it is and what arsenal that it has. But China also has nuclear weapons, and no one's really talking about denuclearizing China because we've accepted that's just not going to happen. So with North Korea, I think it's going to be a similar situation. But at the same time, also keep in mind that 50 years ago when America was fighting North Vietnam and the Vietnam War, nobody would have thought 50 years from now, America and Vietnam would be close allies and close friends with each other. So in the next 50 years, you never know what's going to happen. Maybe there'll be some kind of political calculus from North Korea that it'll be worth it to maybe ally with the U.S. over China, and that'll form some kind of new relationship. But we really have no idea. It's still just too early to tell.
So right now, basically, there's no real direct communication, and it's kind of unclear what's happening. But when we live here in Japan, one of the things we see and hear about a lot are the weapons tests from North Korea. So regularly, North Korea fires missiles, which often fly over Hokkaido into the Pacific Ocean, sometimes fall short of Hokkaido and into the Sea of Japan. Can you explain a little bit what is maybe the thinking of North Korea behind those tests?
Yeah, it really can be described as saber rattling. It's to show these other countries that North Korea is armed and that it has these weapons. But at the same time, I don't think North Korea is, I don't think Kim Jong-un is an idiot or that he's stupid, that he understands what the risk would be of actually directly attacking Japan. So I think these missile launches are carefully calibrated so that they don't hit anything, that they don't hit any major cities or any kind of places where there's a civilian population. But the problem is they still create all these environmental issues. There's no prior warning given when these missiles are shot. And also, at the end of the day, we don't really know where these missiles will land. So far, no one has been injured or hurt yet, but it all just takes one missile for that to happen. And then, there's a huge international incident between both sides. But I also think that I think most people in Japan have just kind of gotten used to it at this point. It's a lot like South Korea. South Korea's neighbored North Korea, obviously, for decades, and they know that there's a huge security risk right next to them. But I think Japanese people have kind of understood that, well, if worse comes to worse and we're going to be attacked, we have to rely on the JSDF and the U.S. security forces to protect us. So, but that also ties into Japan's own position about, like, do we renew Article 9 of the Constitution? Do we have our own offensive forces? So it's tied into these wider geopolitical issues.
But those missile launches are quite frequent, and as you said, it just takes one to misfire or to not go as planned and fall into the ocean, or maybe perhaps even fall into the ocean but fall onto a passing fisher ship. But what is the risk? Like, is there a percentage? Do like military strategists calculate what is the actual chance of this misfiring and hitting Japan?
I think the risk is calculated as low, but recently, I think this was about a year ago, the Japanese government has threatened to shoot down any kind of North Korean projectile that comes into its territory. They've said that, but they've not actually done that. So I think they would only invoke that type of defense of those types of powers if they're 100% sure that the missiles are going to hit somewhere. So it is a bit scary to kind of think that there's really not much that can be done about this, but Japan is only a defensive country. It's not like South. So the difference between Japan and South Korea is that South Korea, in response to these types of threats, they've actually done their own missile tests. They've shot missiles into the air. They've shot artillery. They've shown a lot of military equipment off. That's because South Korea isn't constrained constitutionally by whatever military powers they can have, but Japan is. So the other thing though that Japan is trying to do is invest in more anti-defensive missile defense systems and to protect itself against these projectiles.